All right. Well, thank you, Sarah, for being on our latest episode of Tea Time with the Teacher. How's it going?
It's going great. How about you?
We're getting through it. We are
We are.
nearing the end point. So, yeah, I know you teach in Texas. Whereabouts?
So I'm in San Antonio and Northeast Independent School District.
Okay.
And I teach
And
at Harmony Hills, which is it's a Title I campus.
okay. And you teach fifth grade. So is that considered middle school or is that considered elementary?
So it's elementary and I teach fifth grade reading. I think what's kind of cool is our school allowed us to still remain departmentalized even through all of this because most of the district has said, no, you're going to be self-contained. You teach all subjects, but we made it work to where we could actually still teach our content, which is nice. So we've
Yeah.
made it work throughout this whole thing.
Have you been at the same school, the same district for your whole career? Have you moved around?
So I'm actually a product of Northeast. And once I came back from school, from graduating, I actually taught in Comal ISD for 1 year and then went back to Eisenhower Middle School where I actually attended also. And I taught eighth grade there for 6 years. And then I moved to Harmony Hills Elementary, which is also my elementary school, where I taught second grade and now fifth grade. So it's kind of neat I've taught now 8 years at two campuses that I actually attended when I was little.
Yeah, what's that been like? Do you still see this like similar faces or has everyone kind of moved on since then?
So elementary school, everyone's moved on, but in middle school, I actually taught eighth grade with Kim Woods, and she was my coach when I was there.
No
So
way.
when I came back, I actually coached with two of my other coaches and then taught with her. And so
Oh
it's it,
wow.
it's kind of
Wow.
crazy because it comes full circle. And now I'm stepping into coach indoor for a
Mhm.
team, and now Kim's daughter Addie is on the team. So it's just the world just gets smaller and smaller.
And was that a product of them being influential in your life, or was that it just happened to where you guys ended up?
So the one of the coaches that reached out to me when I was in Comal ISD, when she heard that I was back, she was like, "Do you have any interest in coaching at the middle school level?" And I've coached volleyball. At that point, I had coached volleyball for at least 3 years, and I played it all my life. So I was like, "Do I want to coach? Do I not?" And I was like, "You know what? It's a good opportunity. I'll interview." And so they were actually the ones that brought me in there and allowed me that opportunity. And that's when I really fell in love with teaching reading. And I taught eighth grade reading workshop, which is, I don't know what it is in Houston or in other cities, but it's for all the kids that failed the previous year's STAR test. So
Mhm.
I had kids that failed the seventh grade reading STAR. Most of them had been retained at least 1 or 2 years, just kids that were not very happy that I took the place of an elective. But I loved it. And I've always worked with the low income kids, the kids that really need my help. So I enjoyed it. It was a good experience. And that's kind of what started me into my master's program, which I went to Texas A&M for that. And I finished last August.
Is that where you went undergrad as well?
No, I went to Austin Peay State University in Clarksville, Tennessee, and I played volleyball there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. How do you feel like we call it reading intervention, which is, I think, a pretty, like intense way of, like we need to intervene and like fix, because these kids are,
Yes.
and they're marked so early as far as like, they're, they don't read well or, but how do you feel your school's, like what's been the whole pandemic teaching? Are you guys fully in person like at the beginning or because I know for your kids it's probably even extra important that you're able to be with them.
Yes. So I think this is now the third or fourth time we've switched schedules. So our whole district did the first 4 weeks all virtual. So everybody was virtual, but we were teaching from our room. And then after the first 4 weeks, we all had 5 kids come into our class. And these 5 kids were our SPED population, our ESL, the ones that really needed to be in person. And
Mhm.
then after the 2 weeks, we were there were no spikes, no nothing. So we brought in 5 more. So now each class had 10. Well, then after the 2 weeks of that, they opened it up and said anybody could come back. At that point, we only had 20 in person and 60 online. So we flipped it to where it was getting too hard doing the hybrid. Having kids in your class
Mhm.
and teaching online was just too much, especially because the kids that were in our class, they would now be joining other Zoom rooms while we had our own online class. So because we were departmentalized, you were hearing feedback from them. Our kids on our online Zooms could hear our in-person kids on their Zoom. So it was too much. So we revamped the whole thing and said, okay, these two teachers, you're going to have in-person kids first, then they flip-flop, they teach theirs, while the social studies teacher and myself, we each taught our online class, switched, taught another online class, and then we went and taught our in-person kids. But now, because we've had so many kids come back, this past Monday, we flipped it again, and now we have 3 in-person classes at 14 to 15 each and only 1 online of 33. So for us, I teach reading in person with 15 kids in my room. Then I move to another room and I teach 33 online kids. Then I move to another room and I teach 14 kids. And I move to another room and teach another 15 kids.
Mm-hmm.
So we're the ones moving instead of the kids. And I got sick back in December, but that's because I'm coaching, I'm doing all this, but most of our kids have been great. I know we've only had a few that have actually gotten sick. And that's kind of one of my biggest things is I think kids should be in person. And I don't know how many parents I've talked to that have been worried and they say, you know what, the kids are getting sick at school. And I'm like, actually, no, we're probably the most controlled area because kids are wearing masks. They're sanitizing. They're staying at their own desk. They're not transitioning and moving. And when they do, everything's wiped down. So
yeah, no, I think, when you hear, because we do very similar as far as, I go from teaching a class of 15 in person to then going to a classroom where you're teaching virtually to kids at home. And sometimes they talk about like, oh, over the weekend I hung out with these 10 people. And it's like, oh, well, that's where you could be getting it. You're not getting it
exactly.
here eating lunch. But yeah, no, I agree. So you've been teaching this is your 9th year, right?
My 9th year, yes.
So what was year 1, Sarah, versus year 9? I know this is kind of an outlier, but
So when I came back from school, I graduated in December because I wasn't able to student teach and play volleyball at the same time. So I had to push back a semester. So when I came back, I actually worked at a preschool with 3 and 4-year-olds. And I was like,
wow.
oh my goodness, this is not what I want to do. Obviously I was just in transition. And at that point, I think with teaching, it was like, there were very minimal jobs open. It's not like now where unfortunately there's a lot of teacher turnover. You can find a job a lot of times in December when kids graduate. People are like pulling people to be in schools now. But so I taught preschool for a few months, and then I actually got a job in Comal ISD where I went and taught PPCD just for 2 months, and then I got moved to a 2nd grade class. So my first year teaching was a 2nd grade class. I came in October, and because it was my first year there, because I was coming in October, the teachers that were having to give up kids, they gave up the high ones. So my first year was pretty simple in the aspect of I didn't have to do as much reading intervention. I pulled small groups, but all of my groups were pretty high. So I feel lucky that my first year was not a complete, just as difficult as most first year teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I moved to 8th grade, I was like, man, this feels like a true first year teacher because it's everything. And I hate to say this, everything that I learned in school, you hear these things, you try to implement what you learned. And once you get in there, it's like, you do what you need to do. And I will say I had one classroom management class in college at Austin P, and it was by Joe Jurls, and it completely changed the way that I taught. And I think even in year 9, I'm still implementing some of the stuff that he made us do. And it was like okay, day 1, what are you going to do? Where are you going to put your pencils? Where are you going to have kids turn things in? Okay, you have this kid who does this, and you have this kid who does this. How will you separate them? How will you group them? And it was like a 20-page plan of, okay, you're going in as your first year. What are you going to do? How are you going to basically manage your class? And I think because of that, I did not have that much trouble, I guess, as my first year, but now as my ninth grade or teaching for my ninth year, it's like, am I so anal about what's on the wall? Am I making sure that my anchor
Mhm.
charts are perfect? No, I'm not.
Mhm.
I'm especially when we're transitioning four times. It's like my anchor charts went from being these beautiful, colorful things to now just black and white because I have to make four of them now. I can't keep moving anchor chart to anchor chart. But I think, you learn so much and throughout the years of classroom management. And I think for me in reading in general, right? My master's program through Texas A&M completely changed the way that I teach reading. And I know you mentioned earlier, you said, kids are being labeled earlier as, they have trouble reading. And that reading intervention is so important. And too many times I think kids are being labeled as sped. And they're not sped. They don't have a learning disability. They're just not getting, I think, that direct and explicit instruction. And that's just me being honest, because I've gotten kids in second grade that were labeled sped. And I was like, with these, I'm working with this kid specifically for 30 minutes a day, and 30 minutes a day has completely changed the way that he's reading, decoding the word study, all of that. And it just shows that the more you teach and the more you learn yourself, the better you are with helping those kids kind of close those gaps, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel like it's easy to label because then you can label and move on. And
Right.
oftentimes because education is, it's easy to label when you dive deeper into the surface and you say, maybe if I allocated more resources, allowed them to work one-on-one every day, I mean, what kid wouldn't improve?
Right. Right.
So I think that's awesome. And then I was going to ask like if you had advice for first year teachers, but it sounds like coming up with a clear classroom management plan, and then being practical. I feel like those classes in college and stuff, you want to
They're
tell every professor, like, tell me what I need to do to survive on day
right.
one and have me practice.
Yeah. And I always think like, what do I want to do next? Do I want to go get my doctorate? Do I want to do this? And I would almost want to continue teaching. And I want to be a reading specialist. That's what I have my master's in. But at the same time, it's like, I think teaching a college class and being like, look, everything you've learned up until this point, great, fantastic,
Mhm.
but it's not real life. It's the kids that they teach you to have are always like middle ground kids. They don't teach you that you're going to have a kid that comes in and they don't have a home. They're homeless, or they're in foster care and they need this and they need that. And then you have little Susie who is extremely high. So what are you going to do with those?
Mhm.
And you hear the term differentiate, and it's unless you really know what that means. And obviously, I think now teacher programs they're getting stronger, and
Mhm.
that's what needs to happen. Our teacher programs need to really prepare our teachers for real life instead of just kind of schmoozing and saying this would be a nice lesson to teach.
Mhm.
Plot, this would be a nice lesson to do this. It's like, okay, here's a nice lesson to teach plot, but how can you switch it up for four different groups? How can you target this kid who doesn't even know what plot means, can't read the words, and how are you going to help this kid who can read everything, can use a plot pyramid, just more like that.
Yeah. Some class, like your senior year, where it's like you've learned the theoretical part, you've learned how to craft your lesson plans and stuff. Now let me tell you the reality and let's bridge that gap so that you don't
Yes.
go in day one and think like, oh wait, this isn't like this kid's hitting the wall. They didn't
Right.
teach me like what to do when
What
that's
to
happening.
do.
Or this kid doesn't read. So like my lesson plan or can't read, so this lesson
Yeah.
plan, I need to adapt it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So with everything that's gone on, I know that so many schools have shifted, like as far as how much we use technology.
Mhm.
So I know that you've kind of expressed, where parents and families and even sometimes kids, there's this huge tech gap with that. So have there been any frustrations or any gaps that you've seen that, you'd hope to see some growing and some improving for the future?
So I think, and that has really been my biggest frustration, I think, is like the lack of effort and the lack of accountability, though, with our online kids. So obviously, there are parents. Like I think I told you about the email
Mhm.
that I received or a text from a parent that said, I just don't really know what to do. But this was back, I want to say January, February, and I'm like, I think for parents moving in, if they say, okay, I am not very literate when it comes to technology. And they tell their teachers this. I know for me, if she would have come to me or if other parents had been like, okay, come August, come September, I don't know anything. Can you help me so that I can monitor my child. I can help my child. And I think doing that, maybe a Zoom class and being like, okay, parents, if you don't have any idea what your kid is doing, click this link, join me for an hour, and I'm going to walk you through what Google Classroom is, where you can find their assignments. Even if it says it's turned in, click it because it's usually blank. Like things like this that parents don't really know right off the bat. And I've also told, I don't know how many parents I've told, I'm like, I hate to say this, but your child is lying to you. They know
Oh,
what,
yeah.
I'm like, they know what to do. They are playing you.
Yeah.
They are playing you. And they're like, but it says it's turned in. I'm like, because they clicked the turn in button.
Yeah.
That's all that they did. They
Yeah.
did nothing to it.
They could
Or
put the random letters if it's a
yes,
required question. Oh, yeah.
yeah. Or it's like, my Zoom link isn't working. Oh, really? Because how many times do you have internet issues in a week? It's very rare to have internet issues 3 to 4 times a week. So it's things like that. And I know for me and for my fifth graders, obviously at the end of last year, starting in March, when everyone shut down, everyone went completely online. But I know for us in second grade, I Zoomed with my kids 2 or 3 times a week, and it was just a morning meeting. It wasn't a direct instruction because we were told no new content, review, because this is obviously unprecedented and we don't know what's going to happen. And a lot of the kids kind of learned a little bit there how to use Classroom. Like we do Google Classroom, some use Seesaw. I know that there are other platforms, but for the most part with our fifth graders this year, it was the first 4 weeks of online classes. Like, this is your Zoom link. I'm going to post it on Google Classroom. When you post this in your browser, I want you to bookmark it. This is how you bookmark it. I want you to bookmark all 4 Zoom classes so that you don't have to scroll through Google Classroom Stream to find that link. You know what I mean? And even I had a kid the other day that was like, can you please post your Zoom link on the stream? I had to scroll a long time. And I'm like, it's March. You should have bookmarked that. I told you how to bookmark it. So we went over that again. We went over, this is classwork. Here are your assignments. This is your due date. This is that. And it was kind of just, how do you navigate all the technology in order to be successful? And I know for me, it was like, we didn't teach content for probably 4 weeks because it was mainly, this is what you do. This is how you can be successful. Obviously we have 33 kids that are online. And I can tell you that half of them should be in class because they're not successful online. And that's one of the things, like moving forward, I love the fact that we have online. I think for public schools, it's great because it keeps a lot of our public school kids in public school. They're not going to charter schools. They're not going to private schools. They're not going to a homeschool program because we offer that online. But I think there needs to be some sort of guideline, like maybe 3 strikes and you're out and you should come back to school, instead of just like you can stay online as much as you want and teachers are going to continue working harder than you.
It's going to be really weird come end of the year when like we track absences, and I don't know what the state is going to do because I mean, speaking personally, we have at least 10% of kids that have 50, 75 absences because they've just never logged in.
Yeah.
Parents have never, said like, oh, here's a medical excuse or here's, whatever. So it's like, I mean, I know the answer to it. The answer is probably going to be, they're all passed, but it's crazy because I think it's another example of it's a unique opportunity to get to the root of the issue, which is like a lot of our kids, especially in low income areas, are not technologically literate. And that's another huge obstacle to face when going to college. So if
Right.
anything, now could be a great time to really teach them how to engage virtually, how to be self-sufficient, how to set a schedule, all these things that, when they go to college and then a lot of them struggle with it, we could do. And so when I think of like my school leaders or my district leaders, their response, I don't know about your school, but their response to our frustrations was changing the grading policy to where the lowest a kid could get would be a 70. So
That's
it's like that's the easy fix for you, but that's not
right.
the easy fix for us. And of course, more importantly, it's not the easy fix for the student.
No.
So instead of having workshops, instead of having these opportunities to teach the kids, let's just give them a 70 when they've done no work. And I think
Yeah.
that's just like the epitome of where our school system is right now.
And that's what's so frustrating because it's like, what does that teach them though? That teaches them that they don't have to work hard in life. They don't have to, and they'll just continue to move on. I was like, that's not realistic. And we did an article, we did argumentative text for like 5 weeks. And one of them was, do you think all kids should receive participation trophies? And it was so funny to see the differences in what they thought. And the kids that said yes, these are all my kids that don't try hard. And I'm like, of course you want a participation trophy because you're not having to work for anything. I said, so you think we should get participation trophy? So as a teacher, I come in, I'm here 7:15 to 3:45. These are my contract hours. So if I come in and I get on my Zoom and I'm like, okay, I'm here. You did it. And I let you guys sit for 70 minutes. So I said, do I deserve a paycheck? And they're like, well, no, you didn't do anything. I'm like, that's my point. Do you think that I mean, we went into this whole tangent of, obviously it started with participation trophies, but we went into, it's not realistic. If you have a job in the future, if you show up, maybe you show up late, maybe you show up, but then you sit there and you don't do anything, you're not going to keep your job. So why do you think that I should allow you to pass when you don't do any of the work? And a lot of it, I'm like, you're online, you're there, you're joining the Zoom, but what are you doing during class? And I think something that I've changed recently with that is I have, when we had two classes and it was 21 and 19. And what I did is I would say, okay, 15 minutes word study workboard, go. And I would put my 5 or 6 kids that I know never do anything. I'd put them in breakout rooms and I'd have them share their screen. And I say, you keep your screen share this entire 15 minutes. And so I was actually able to pop in and see what they were doing instead of having to go in and like, obviously I can open up all their Google slides. I can see what
Mhm.
they're doing. I can see where they're at. But this way it's like, all I do is I pop into their room, it's open, they're moving their stuff. And that was something that really helped making sure that my kids that they just sit there are actually participating. And then I can give them, at least some credit instead of no credit. Cause I know our district did the same thing where it's like, well, 50 or above, 50 or above. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, if they're not doing 50% of the work, I'm not going to give them a 50. I refuse to do that. And we had a bunch of sped students that were online too. And it's like, obviously we have accommodations and modifications, but when they're just straight up lazy, I said, I refuse. Like, I've done my part. If they aren't trying at all, they're not going to pass. They're not going to get a 70. And it's just
And
the
then, yeah.
reality of it's just
And
the
then they come
reality of what
after
we do.
you and they
Yeah.
say, give me 10 work samples of ways in which you accommodate it in the hopes that you just are so burnt out dealing with everything else that you're like, okay, fine.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And I feel like that's like a good indicator of like public education, especially in low income areas, is like the setting low expectations. We're doing a disservice to the kids because they're not going to learn. And then when they go to college, or if they don't go to college or whatever, they didn't learn these things because we
Right.
never afforded that opportunity to them. So like for us, the reason why the grading changed was because the Houston Chronicle had an article with HISD and how many kids were failing. So it's like it's so clear what you at the top are interested in. You're interested about the public perception. If you
Yes.
had sat in classes and actually done your own classes, you would have realized this is not the solution.
No.
And yeah, and the reason why I think I started this podcast and why I've enjoyed it is because I really wanted the message to get out there that like when teachers are frustrated and upset and complain, there's a reason. Like
Right.
I think so many times if a teacher says like, "Oh, I think we could be doing this better," or "I disagree with this policy," then it's like, "Why are you complaining? Why don't you?" And it's like these are people who want their kids to do the best
Right.
possible way. So when we're frustrated, it's not like we're frustrated about how much we're getting paid or anything. We just want our kids to learn. So I feel like that's something that people outside of the teaching profession are like, why don't you just be quiet and like do your job?
Well, and they say, oh, you only work 10 months a year. You have the summers off. And it's like, I want you to come in and I want you to sit with me for 1 week and see what you think. And I think back in March when everything shut down and parents actually saw what went into teaching, they were like, teachers should get paid over 100,000. We now see it. And then going back to, you still have those parents that are like, well, I'm so sick of homeschooling my child. I'm like,
You,
all you have to do is get your kid on Zoom and we do the rest. You're not lesson planning.
yeah,
You're not differentiating. You're being a parent. That is what you are doing. You are not homeschooling your child. You are literally doing what you should be doing as a parent, and that's helping your kid after school if they're struggling. That is what you do. That is your job as a parent. And
yeah,
it's just, and I think that's one of the biggest frustrations also that I have is, you said the perception, right? I know our school, before I got there, it failed with an F because of scores, because of this, because of that. So we've had a ton of district people. We've had other outside people come in and see what we're doing. And this year I know they've been pushing scores. And I'm like, scores are fine. You know what? At the end of the year, we do what we have to. Our kids grow. But I'm like, not only in fifth grade, right? So fifth grade is usually a promotion year. And
hmm
I laugh because I was in eighth grade and now I'm in fifth grade. And it's always the promotion years where
hmm
they have to pass a star in order to move on. And so even at the beginning, it's like, well, they took a benchmark at the end of September. Benchmark scores were low across the board, awful, right? And we're getting in trouble because we're not teaching as many reading comprehension passages and this and that. And I'm like, my kids can't even read. How do you expect me, or why do you want me to push reading passages and comprehension questions? I know you want me to do that because you want them to see what they're going to see on the star. I said, but I've got to get to the root of the problem. And with that, for me, it's like I went back to the 6-syllable types with my kids. They didn't know the difference between open and closed. They didn't know what a final stable syllable was. And if they don't know these things, they cannot decode the words. And if they cannot decode the words, they cannot read them. If they can't read, and then with fluency, it's like I have to start back from scratch because not only am I trying to close gaps from previous years, but you have a whole semester almost in fourth grade that they were not taught anything. It's just frustrating.
yeah,
And I think, again, it's like, it should not be that scores define a teacher, right? It shouldn't be that scores define a school itself. Obviously, there are teachers that, they are not great teachers. It's the reality of this profession. There are
hmm
teachers that come in, they sit there on Zoom with some of their online kids and they get a paycheck. And our kids fail because of it. They come in, they're not ready. I know by the time I got some in eighth grade, I'm like, how did you make it this far? And it's because they just
hmm
didn't want to deal with them. And I think that was one of my biggest things is, I wanted to move back down to elementary because I didn't want that to happen. I wanted to be the one that could, change some of that. And that's why I really loved second grade. I love second because most of them were in the process of learning to read, and I could help those ones that were really low because I did not want them to get to fifth grade or did not want them to move on to eighth grade without being fully prepared, because it's that much more work on a teacher that at that point, like in eighth grade, it's tough because you're reading at a third or fourth grade level. High school is going to be very, very difficult. And that they will continue to struggle. And it's like, you have those conversations with some of the kids. Like I know personally, I would have those difficult conversations and be like, this is your next 4 years are going to be tough. I do not want you to give up. And I don't know. It's the tough part of the profession. It's, too many times kids slide through the cracks and there are teachers that care, teachers that really advocate for their kids. And then there are other ones that just say, you know what, it's just easier if we just move you forward. Let it be someone else's issue. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Especially the behavior kids. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and then without a support system outside,
Right.
and as well as other teachers, it's like how much impact can you do within one class, within your class in 1 year in the context of their whole schooling? And so
Right.
it's sometimes kind of daunting where it's like, am I really making an impact or a difference? And and I think that leads to kind of this burnout.
Mhm.
So I know we've talked a lot about our frustrations and everything. Is there, because I know this has also highlighted some of at least my kids that are just have done amazing. So
Right.
like through it could be this year, but just in your previous years, what's like been has there been one story that has stuck out or one student that stuck out that's really, someone you're going to remember as far as the impact you had or maybe the impact they had on you?
So I think back again to my 8th grade, teaching 8th grade, because those kids are so the ones that I got automatically hated me. They came in, "You took the place of an elective. I wanted to do this. I wanted to do that." And I'm like, "I didn't fail the STAR test. You did. You did." And that I would be real with them, and I was hard on them. And one of the kids, he pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And I don't want to say we didn't really butt heads at all, but he would blatantly disregard what I was saying, wouldn't pay attention, wouldn't do that. And then I'm like, okay, how can I reach this kid? And there was, I don't know if you've heard of philosophical chairs. It's in like an Avid strategy where you bring in an article and you talk to them about like if I were to say participation trophies, right? So I say, okay, here's your topic. Participation trophies should be a thing, right? And so they would do research on both sides of the story, and then we have two sides of the classroom. One side's yes, one side's no. They'd stand up, they'd walk to whatever side they were at, and we'd go back and forth between people. I believe that participation trophy should be a thing because blah, 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 blah. Then the other side would say, okay, so and so said that participation should be a thing because it motivates kids. Well, I believe, so they go back and forth. So it's not only practicing the listening skills, but it's also they're debating, the research, everything. Well, this kid comes in and I'm like, we have an article on should marijuana be legalized? And he was like, what? I'm like, oh, you want to pay attention today? You want to listen? He's like, because you're giving me topics I like. I'm like, they've always been decent topics, but I think that was my second year teaching. And when he said that, you're giving me topics I like, it completely changed my thought process with, okay, our textbook adoptions. I have not opened, I hate to say this live, I have not opened my textbook one time this year
Hmm.
because the stories in there are so bad. The
Hmm.
kids do not want to read them. And so what I started doing at the 8th grade level is, okay, I'm pulling in articles from NewsELA or Common Lit that these kids actually want to talk about. And it obviously talking about drugs in school does happen, but it's like, okay, I'll give you a voice. Do you think marijuana
Hmm.
should be legalized? He researched, he wrote, he debated, it was like completely changed. And I'm like, this should show you how you could be as you get older. I said, this is the one thing, like you've now proven yourself that you are worth more than what you think about yourself. And I remember I checked in on him his freshman year. I know he was failing freshman year. I showed up at campus at Churchill High School and I was like, what's going on? And he was like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, I told you I would check up on you every year. And your counselors are telling me you're failing. Why? And he's like, I checked in on sophomore year. Junior year, there were things that his parents were both in Mexico. He was staying with a friend on a couch. In and out of school, but then he graduated. He finally graduated. He came back and he was like, I owe this all to you. I am so thankful that you showed me like that I can be more than what my parents were. I can be more than
Hmm.
my group of friends. I can actually be successful and maybe go to college. And he ended up not going to college, but still it's like the fact that he graduated high school was huge because he was the first one in his family that actually made it all the way through high school. And I think that story kind of resonates with me because the kids I had in 8th grade they were it, they were the ones that needed my help the most. Like obviously my 5th graders, my 2nd graders, yes, but these were the kids that really truly needed a teacher to believe in them.
Hmm.
And it's just amazing to see like the impact that you do have, because sometimes you get frustrated and it's like, especially this year has been so difficult with, okay, well, now we're going to change this. Now you do this. Now you do that. Now you do that.
Mhm.
Oh, well, you want to take some time? Well, we don't have subs. You can't take time off. That's that's another thing. But
Wow.
it's like the frustrations of that, and then you hear that one kid that comes back and they say thank you, and it's like, this is why we do what we do. We do it because of the kids. We don't do it for the summers off. We don't definitely don't do it for the paycheck, right? We don't do it to get verbally abused by some kids that don't know any better because they don't have a stable home life. We do it because our whole goal as a teacher is not just to teach content. That's not what it's about. It's, can we make you a better human being? Can we prepare you for to be successful in life? And I think that's kind of the way that I start looking at it, and it's completely changed the way that I teach.
Yeah, that's so well put. Whenever I ask a teacher, what's been their most impactful moment, never has a teacher ever said, "Oh yeah, it was this lesson on,"
Right.
It's
Yeah.
always been a story about a student or a certain interaction, and that's what really it's about. So I know that gives me energy and that keeps me going, especially this year where it's been
Yeah.
really, really tough.
Yeah.
But that's all I had, Sarah. I really appreciate you coming on. I really enjoyed talking with you.
I did
Um,
too. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, and yeah, let's stay connected, and I'll reach out to you after this, and hopefully we can get this episode out and
Okay.
collaborate in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Awesome. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I
You
appreciate you
too.
doing this. All right.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Sarah.